Any kind of moment, and welcome to our first blended virtual and live in-person panel. So let me go ahead and introduce our panelists. We've got, and we'll talk through what the focus of this session is. Let me go one by one through the bios here. Mimi Ito is a cultural anthropologist, learning scientist, entrepreneur, and advocate for connected learning. Learning that is equity-oriented, centered on youth interest, and socially connected. Her work decodes digital youth culture for parents and educators, offering ways to tap interests and digital media to fuel learning that is engaging, relevant, and social. She is professor in residence and the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation Chair in Digital Media and Learning at the University of California, Irvine, where she directs the Connected Learning Lab. The CLL stewards the Connected Learning Alliance, an expanding network of educators, experts, and youth-serving organizations mobilizing new technology in the service of equity, access, and opportunity for young people. Mimi is also co-founder of Connected Camps, a nonprofit providing online learning experiences for kids in all walks of life. We also have in our presence Dr. Mike Karlin, an assistant professor of STEM and the founding director of the SNAP Institute for Technology and Education at California State University, Dominguez Hills. Additionally, Karlin is a former pre-K-12 teacher and technology coach with nearly 2 decades of expertise in educational technology. He currently teaches pre-service educators and conducts research on equity and broadening participation in STEM education. And also joining us is Anne Ottenbreit-Leftwich. She's the Barbara B. Jacobs Chair in Education and Technology, a professor of instructional systems technology within the School of Education, and adjunct professor of computer science at Indiana University. She's also associate vice provost for technology at Indiana University. Her expertise lies in areas of design and technology, computer science, K-12 curriculum resources, and implementation of professional development. She investigates how computer science can be taught to kids from very young to all through the developmental stages, and ways to prepare pre-service and in-service educators to teach computer science. She's also co-PI for the ESIP Alliance, which seeks to broaden participation in computing at K-16 levels. Okay, I'm exhausted from these bios. I hope you're too. You're getting the idea that we are assembling a panel of experts here that are going to speak to the ways in which youth use technology and create technology and are engaged in online spaces and digital spaces, third spaces, and everything in between. We're going to start with a few slides that Anne has prepared. And so this is, the theme of today has been, and a commitment, our shared commitment together has been to look at the questions and the issues from a diverse range of perspectives and how we might think about this. And so today in this session, we're going to hear about how youth use technology, how they might be empowered and socially connected and digitally engaged citizens in formation. So Anne wanted us to see a few things, and you can't see what I'm about to show, but on the screen is a photo here that is a digital creation and digital art. She works a lot with digital art with youth. And then I'm going to show, and Anne, I'll have you talk about the project in the state of Indiana that had some kids in Bloomington meeting the governor. Can you speak to that project?
Absolutely. And just to clarify too, these are all pictures of my own kiddos, because wonderfully it just so happened that during COVID, my children were young. So there were a lot of really great opportunities to do research at home on my own children. But so this instance in particular, where two of my daughters formed an all-girls team at elementary level, and they developed an app for the challenges to do CS for social good. So they decided they wanted to build a friendship app of how to find and identify friends. This is particularly important. My daughter switched schools right after COVID. So they wanted to find ways like, how do I identify people to be friends with? What does this look like? So they they created their own app, got information and data from their friends around them, and then were able to share that at the State House. And you can see here, that's one of our senators that the girls are presenting their work to, and ended up being one of the award winners. The other elementary school team, they designed theirs on a parent drop-off line. And anybody that has gone through a parent drop-off line would also appreciate that particular solution. So these are problems that are really, that they are facing. It's in a very authentic way, and trying to think through what kind of data do we need in order to solve this problem? How can we address it? How can we engage different stakeholders in this, and empower them in a way that got them to start thinking about how could I be someone who solves problems in my own community.
Thank you, Anne Leftwich. And Mimi, we're going to go ahead and turn our attention to you, because now we'll go from kind of some of our youngest learners to some of our more advanced learners. And what are you seeing from your view as a cultural anthropologist?
Yeah, thanks so much. And I love the examples from the younger kids, because I think the technology is moving down into the younger age ranges, which is a really important trend. But just to situate a little bit of my research background, I'm an anthropologist of digital youth culture, and I've been studying these dynamics for 30 years now, ever since, teenage girls in Tokyo started the text messaging craze and kids in the US were playing with multimedia CD-ROMs, if you remember those, and kind of observing how with every new wave of technology, there's an evolving, but in many ways a familiar set of dynamics that kick in young people and adults negotiations over how to use the technology. So even though in the technology space, it feels like we're always struggling to embrace the new and respond to all of this churn and adaptation, I wanted to just ground ourselves a little bit in what I kind of call the social and cultural facts of nature around kids and technology, which have remained incredibly consistent and resilient over the course of the 3 decades that I've been doing this research, even as the technology continues to evolve and the populations engaging with the technology evolves. There are certain dynamics that I think we need to be mindful of, because they are very consistent, because society and culture moves very slowly, even though technology moves fast. So the first, which I think Anna's already, set up a lovely example of, which is that, these technologies are adopted because they give incredible benefits to people. And there's a lot of learning benefits. I study mostly out of school learning, where kids have more of that freedom and autonomy to mess around and adopt technology. But even our own lived experience as users of social media, games, AI now, I don't think we need to belabor the point that kids are benefiting, whether it's through social connection, keeping in touch with friends and family, going on to YouTube to figure out how to fold an origami crane or how to cook something. I think our lived experience speaks to the fact that these benefits exist from a learning and development perspective. So that's the first social fact of nature. The second is that the grown-up world often reacts with sort of fear and kind of a restrictive impulse when young people are at the forefront of adopting new things that they did not necessarily grow up with or understand, even though they usually end up adopting those things like 3 or 4 or 5 or 10 years later. And technology becomes an intergenerational wedge issue between young people and grown-ups when grown-ups are put in this position of, their primary role is policing and limiting use and logging screen time hours and all of these things that we're often told makes us good parents or teachers if we limit access, rather than, I think, what we've seen from Anne's case, joint engagement, mentorship, learning together, trust building, all of these things that could bring young people and adults together around technology. And that's not to blame grown-ups. It's a reasonable response, but this is a consistent pattern that the stigmatization and demonization of technology in the hands of young people have created a new set of intergenerational tensions. And our connected learning model has really been around how do we empower grown-ups to productively engage with the positive, which we think is the best way to inoculate against the negatives, is that intergenerational connection. The third social fact of nature is that universal, top-down, one-size-fits-all solutions are very beguiling, but they don't work, and there's a lot of unintended consequences. It's a shortcut that doesn't address the root causes of young people's needs, and we need to sit with what we already know young people need to feel good and healthy and learn, versus thinking that removing a technology is going to solve all those problems. So we know as educators and parents and youth development workers that things like health and medical services, caring adults, wellness resources, teacher professional development, media literacy, school culture and climate interventions. These are the things that really make a difference. And yet we have a desire to latch onto extracting technology will solve those problems. And the final point I think that I want to raise is directly tied to that. And one of the biggest unintended consequences of these very well-meaning policies around technology restriction is that it raises incredible equity issues that we know exist because of the structural inequalities. If we look at the cell phone bans, which I think are a focus of this conversation, in fact, we know that these bans are primarily going to be focused on public schools, and they're going to be unequally applied within the public school system, where I think in New York City, even like in the earlier waves of cell phone bans in 2015, New York actually lifted the cell phone ban because it was applied unequally between low income and higher income serving schools, where the lower income schools that had metal detectors, they were being applied much more rigorously. And that's just an example, but there's a lot of research that shows that technology, the way that technology policies are implemented in schools, creates this inequality where it's not just the in-school learning, but out-of-school learning. It's sort of the wealthier families with a lot more technology access really lean into those more creative, agentive, youth-driven forms of technology engagement. And in contexts that are serving lower income communities, that may be more dependent on the public infrastructure, that the primary messaging that young people are getting around technology is that it's bad, it needs to be limited, that it's, something, all of the fun things that kids are doing, like creating apps or, creating YouTube videos, are sort of not something that young people in lower income schools are given access to. And that the social effective nature across all educational technology is that there's a tendency for the rich to get richer in terms of the deployment of technology. So I'll end there. And I think, Anne, did you have your hand up if you wanted to? I didn't know if you had a.
I did, but I don't know how much time we have, and I want to make sure that I am following direction.
To Mike Karlin for a moment. I want to, when we open today's session and the big start of our day, I promised this room that we were going to thread this needle perfectly on both sides, that we were going to not get anything wrong. And I'm saying this tongue in cheek, of course, because what I appreciate, Anne and Mimi, about what you've said so far, you're bringing a lot of nuance and a different way to look at this issue. At the start of this morning's session, Superintendent Catherine Truitt, our state superintendent of instruction, talked about this need to not just have a policy in place, but to bring people along with a policy that is going to feel like we're serving the state of North Carolina. She talked about if we were to set up an outright ban, what we would do is set up a condition in which people would start taking stances on that ban. And now they're arguing from a stance position instead of from a position that says, like, well, what would serve North Carolina? So, Mike, I want to turn the attention to you at this time, and I want to have you reflect with us about how you talk to your pre-service teachers. I think you've shared some slides here that if I were to kind of advance them, you have kind of looked at this idea of a ban with your pre-service teachers, soon-to-be teachers, and talk to us about what you're seeing in this conversation.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Mike Karlin. So I'm at Cal State Dominguez Hills, which is in South Central LA. We serve Los Angeles Unified, along with Inglewood, Compton, and a lot of the schools that Mimi was just talking about. So I think this connects really well. Our pre-service teachers come from those communities as well. They're mostly first-generation students later in life who've decided to become teachers and end up going back to the communities they're from. So what we just saw happen very recently in LAUSD, which is the second largest school district in the nation, is that they've banned cell phones completely within the district, citing that it distracts students from learning, leads to anxiety, and allows cyberbullying, very similar to what Tom Green was talking about earlier. We also saw the whole state of South Carolina just recently. I think that was September 5th, banned cell phones in schools throughout the state. And then here in North Carolina, we're seeing it in some schools as well, like the folks were mentioning in the last panel. So when I bring this up with my pre-service teachers, I ask them to put themselves in the shoes of their future selves and say, when you're going into the classroom, you might have a school policy, you might have a district policy, you might have a state policy. And we talk about kind of where these policies come from. We talk about why these policies might happen, very similar to the conversations Mimi was just discussing. But when I try to move towards, could you go to the next slide, is this idea is that we have a long history of banning things in education. This image on the right, math teachers protest against calculator use over 50 years ago. We have done originally tablets. We wanted tablets out of school. We wanted technology and laptops out of school. Now we want them in school, but not cell phones. And it's not just with technology. It's with book banning. It's with artificial intelligence. It's with sex ed. We have this long history of banning things that we don't necessarily and understandably have the capacity to address in a holistic way or in a way that supports all of our students' needs. As they mentioned earlier too, in the ed tech plan, like these things need to come with teacher professional development and training as well. But so we try to argue, next slide, that when we ban any of these things from the classroom, we make learning about those things and engaging safely with those things and constructively with those things less accessible. And so if we're not talking about these things in schools, if we're just completely banning it and saying, oh, you got cyberbullied, that's not our issue. We ban cell phones, so you've got to deal with that on your own time. Then how do students learn about those things? Some might learn at home, but a lot of students won't get that at home. And they will end up continuing to be passive consumers of these devices and continuing to engage in unsafe practices because they're not getting that understanding, that social development, that community building around how to use these things safely. So what we try to move towards is how can we empower our students learning creativity, and this kind of is, I think, the first question, self-presentation, connectivity, and self-expression through cell phones as innovative tools in the classroom, rather than just banning them completely. How can we leverage them as innovative tools? And that's kind of a semester-long conversation that we engage in. But well, I can try and condense it down to 10 minutes for our panel. And now we've added AI into the mix as well. So how do we do this with AI also? But that's how we frame it.
So I think that many of us wear multiple hats in this conversation. Some of us are preparing future teachers. Some of us are working with teachers. Some of us are working with youth directly out of school. Some of us are parents. Some of us are educators in schools. After this panel, we'll be hearing from a group of district and school administrators who will be talking and speaking to this issue from their points as well. But if we were to take this idea of a ban off the table, but we were trying to thread this needle in the most magical way possible, which is that everyone receives the benefits and experiences none of the harms. Let's imagine that we are able to do that. What, from your view, are some of the benefits? Anne, you spoke about some of this work being done with your own children, but what are you seeing in schools as you work in the state of Indiana? I know you also work nationally. What are some of the benefits that we might miss out on through a quote-unquote ban?
So I think some of the obvious pieces for the ban, and I get it, cell phones can be tempting. And yes, let's be honest, we've all been there, sneaking a text or two in a meeting that really should have been an email. But if we're banning phones altogether, what this is doing is it's missing out on a huge opportunity, first of all, to teach students how to use technology responsibly, right? So instead of seeing phones as distractions, we think of them as tools for learning. When they're used purposefully, they become powerful assets in the classroom. And again, if we can teach students to stay engaged and off Snapchat during class, we're preparing them for a future of being focused during, whatever other meetings they may be in or future types of aspect. The thing I was raising my hand about earlier too was something Mimi had said about the involvement of parents and teachers and how critical that is. I think that element of trying to engage with students and saying, here are some different elements of like how we can think about using it, and the scaffolding that kind of comes in from that is so important. And as we're thinking about just the benefits beyond just not necessarily being distracted or et cetera, or types of elements there are a lot of other pieces that would get lost if students don't have access to these types of technologies, specifically around like the AI types of things. And I know AI is one of the things that is also looking at being banned, which I know cell phones and AI, those are two different types of conversations about what gets banned and what doesn't. But the ability for our students to be able to take the technology and experiment with it and express themselves, those are only going to be things that are going to push North Carolina further, right? If we're producing students that aren't able to use those technologies to express themselves, they're not going to be as competitive as maybe other states that do have that capability, right? To explore those ideas of like, what does this look like? How can I use this in appropriate and ethical ways? And I think that's the other challenge as well. If we don't show students how to use it appropriately, then what's happening on the other side? What are the unintended consequences of that? And in my mind, the unintended consequences, again, come back to what you was saying about the digital equity element of those that are being taught at home. So I would teach my kids. So for example, my local school, one of the teachers has banned AI from being used for my son's science experiment. Now I can talk with him about different types of elements of let's look up different ideas, and here's what a hypothesis might be, and here are some different elements that we can do. But other folks that don't have a family member at home that can discuss, here's how you set up hypotheses, and here's how we can look for different resources, that student's then left on their own. Teachers have this amazing ability to be able to help students figure out, to do the prompting, to do the questions, not necessarily that they have to be an expert in the technology. They just have to be an expert in facilitating those important conversations with the student to get them to think about, now you used it this way. Do you feel like this is a good use? Like, what could we have done better? Or how could we have approached this differently? Like, so I think that's the element of technology gives teachers really great openings to engage in conversations with their students where the students are asking or like considering hard ethical questions about, can we use this? Should we use this? How should we be looking at this? What might be other ways that I get at this information? So it goes back to that creative element in scaffolding that use.
And thank you, Anne. And Mimi, one follow-up question for you, because I know you work directly with youth. So what are you hearing from youth about how they engage with phones and what they want to do when they're using phones and digital media? What do they want to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think Anne's already described, some of the kind of creativity, self-expression, kind of agency needs that young people are pursuing and developing. So, I mean, that's a huge bucket, right? Just youth agency, voice, creativity. The other, which is, I think, intersects a lot with educational conversations about personalized learning or, differentiated instruction, is the ability to go into areas of interest or to engage in ways that accommodate their divergent learning styles and interests, for example, and culturally responsive educational approaches. That what the internet has done for kids is given them like an incredibly rich and diverse palette of cultural experiences, identities that they can see and access online, affinity groups. And this is an area that the informal learning space has like incredibly accelerated for young people. And I think schools are grappling with it, but I feel like is an opportunity space, which could be as simple as like English language learners being able to look things up on their phone in their language, or kids with, different learning dispositions being able to review content at a different pace. And all of these things, technology is just really good at. And it kind of is more challenging within the structure of the school versus an informal learning environment or a home environment. But I think there's a huge opportunity there that you see kids being able to go much more deeply into their cultural identities and interests because of the abundance of content that exists online. And then the last bucket is social connection, right? And it's probably the biggest driver. And most of what we hear around teens and tech skews towards the negative, like, oh my God, it's like negative social comparison and bullying and blah, blah, blah. And of course that all exists because this is life. This is teen culture. That is part of what happens. But what I would try to lift up is the incredible opportunity for example, especially for young people with marginalized identities, to be able to find others who share and support them and give them a sense of connection, well-being, and belonging, which they may not have within their physically local school or community environment. And then the ability for kids to organize and mobilize and have a platform to share what they're doing within authentic communities that, again, might not exist within their real life environments, especially in a context when we're restricting young people's mobility within physical space. So the ability to go into like a gaming community or a fandom or a politically an activist community around climate change, and to be able to actually convene and organize, those are very specialized kinds of usually positive social connections that are new opportunities in addition to just hang out with your friends online. And that's something we found during the pandemic with gaming communities that, I think parents got to see it up close during the pandemic, but it's something that's always existed for kids since they had access to online gaming communities and social media, is that it's where kids go to hang out with their friends now, because they're not necessarily just able to get on their bike or whatever, or subway to, see their buddies, that this is the avenue we've left for kids to just hang out with each other. And, again, at school, it's different because they're usually physically co-present, but I think it's really important to recognize that that is sort of the foundational function of social media and digital games for kids these days.
Yeah.
Can I just add one quick comment to that? Because I think this, again, from like a personal side of things, my one daughter, who's 10, when she gets home, instead of calling her friends, which I remember doing on the phone all day, she actually gets onto a FaceTime call and they go on Roblox together and actually play out acting, kind of like a Barbie scenario, like I'm the mom and you're the daughter type of a thing, engaging online. And that's how they're establishing like that's their play, right? And it's this innocent, like wonderful collaborative where they're building their imagination online together, exchanging.
Callie, I want to turn to you. Callie, the group here met you earlier in the other session, our director of strategic initiatives here at the Fighting Institute. And we want to give you a chance to ask a word too.
Yes, thank you so much for letting me be a part of this conversation. I'm so excited to have this conversation. One thing that kind of came up for me as the panelists were sharing, we talked a lot about what we know from the research, and so I'm curious what remains to be discovered. Are there any current gaps in the research, and where would you invest resources if you had the opportunity? And this is for anyone on the panel.
Mike, we haven't heard from you in a while.
Yeah, I'll follow up on something Anne said about the benefits, and then I think I can connect it back to the research piece also, if I can thread the needle as well as you all have today. So Anne, I think, mentioned a really important point about one of the benefits being that this technology can open up conversations that teachers are really good at having, especially around social emotional learning. And we talked a little bit about the harms that can happen, cyberbullying and things like that. One of the activities we do is bring out all of our pre-service teachers, our future elementary teachers, to local classrooms where they facilitate coding and robotics activities. It serves as professional development for the in-service teachers as well. They get a wonderful field experience from it. But in part of that, they're using a tool called Scratch. Is anyone familiar with Scratch? Okay. So Scratch, you can make simple programs with. It's a block-based coding language. But online, there's a massive repository of lessons that other people have built and shared, and you can comment on other people's and you can remix other people's ideas. And it's very much a social media type flavor to it. So what we see when our students participate in this online space, when they share their ideas, when they upload them, when they remix other people's, sometimes there are people online who will say mean things to them. Sometimes our students will say mean things to other people because that is inevitably a part of it. That harm happens. So our students cause harm. We as adults cause harm. And so it's a safe space for them to engage with. I've been hurt by someone online that I don't even know. And the teacher can then have that conversation with them about, well, what does that mean? What does that look like? What can we do about it? How would you like to move through this? Or you've done something hurtful to a classmate online or to another student online. And we've seen those conversations go really well. They're hard conversations. They take time. But then students learn that this digital online space in many ways is not as separate from our in-person space. There are interactions that build community and bring joy. There are interactions that can cause hurt. And it's important to be accountable for that hurt that we cause and to move through those experiences together as well, which I think is a very interesting and unique avenue for research as well, because what we tend to do with cyberbullying is just say, well, we've just got to ban the social media. We've got to ban the device. But bullying has been around long before cyberbullying, and those dynamics are always at play in the classroom. So rather than banning it, what's the root cause of the issue? What is the student's need that's not being met that is leading to this behavior? And how can we address those unmet needs and work through accountability processes? LAUSD just hit 10 years of restorative justice practices in their classroom. And that's, some teachers have done it really, really well. Some teachers have struggled with it, but they've all had professional development and training in it. So I think that has also led to them being able to navigate these conversations in their classrooms a little more with some grounding and some language to use around those conversations. But to me, that's a really interesting area to explore. Rather than just banning it, how do we support students through these experiences, both students who are cyberbullied and who are doing the cyberbullying in ways that aren't just, okay, you're suspended, okay, we're banning the device, but how can we get at those deeper root levels?
I do have a few more questions, but I want to just see if anyone in the room has questions and to see if, this is not a quiet group. So if you'll let us bring a microphone around so the panelists can hear you, let's go ahead and start taking some audience questions for the next few minutes of our time together.
So I'm just curious, we've heard a few different examples of when kids or adults have gone through experiences where they've had their phones taken away or they've had to put them away and they just are like, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. I feel great. We've also heard that there's a lot of skills that are missing in both kids and adults in how to engage online, how to cope, how to manage notifications and all of that. Have we seen any examples of where kids and maybe adults have gotten help with those skills, have gotten some training in those skills, have had those a chance to practice those, and then perhaps gone through that experience of no longer having their phone? Are they having those same kinds of reactions where they're like, oh, I feel so much better? Or are they really thinking it's no different because I was coping fine and I'm still coping fine? Like, it just seems like haven't seen the other side of. So I'm just curious if there's any like.
When does it start to migrate into something that was learned and now enacted in a positive way? Does anyone want to tackle that question? And I'm mindful that we're nearing the end of time here, so you can tackle it very quickly and comprehensively in 1 minute.
Yeah, I would point people to some of the work that the Harvard Center for Digital Thriving has been doing around having young people reflect on their online practices and how it intersects with the different tensions and stresses that are the real life tensions and stresses. So I think they have an interesting model that has led to some positive benefits.
Thank you, Mimi. That's the Harvard Center for Digital Thriving. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
I have another quick research example too. The Tree Lab out of Northwestern, Sefer Vakil runs that lab. They have one project where they've had students investigate social media around mental health and wellness, high school students in Chicago public schools, and them trying to understand, why is social media designed the way it is? Why do I feel this way when I pick it up, and really get into the neuroscience behind it, the reward that they feel from it, and then challenge that and say, like, is this really how I want to be engaging with technology? Is this beneficial for me? Why do tech companies design the technology this way? What are they getting out of it? And their results have shown that when students are going through this more critical analysis process of the social media tools, then that has led to them not wanting to engage with them as much, and choosing to engage in other ways instead.
I think another really quick, easy one too is also showing students, depending on their ability levels, The Social Dilemma, which was a Netflix documentary drama. So it talks a little bit more about that to allow students to explicate on that. Like I try to talk about that part with my younger children, and that notion of like they're collecting data on you and they're trying to like recommend things to you. Even my pre-service teachers, when I've made them look at the user agreements, right, before, like what's Instagram doing or what is Twitter doing with your content, or what kind, they don't necessarily understand that piece of it. So I think it still comes down to us to be able to talk about these different, I think conversation, right? More conversation needs to happen. And the more educated they are on what's happening, maybe then that will also transcend into our legislative unity about like how our data is being used. We can make more informed contributions as citizens in terms of like what we are voting on. Like California is the only state that actually allows you to look at your digital footprint or your data. And Europe does that. So I just want, again, California is the only state that allows that.
Thank you. One more question we're going to take from the group, and then we're going to move into a break. Jill, the last question.
Just listening to this conversation, it seems clear to me that in, at least for Anne and Mike, both of you, your pre-service teachers are getting some of this training and this consciousness raising, if you want to call it that. My question is, obviously, education prep programs are important in this conversation, and do you see changes happening in other areas in schools that are recognizing this skill set that teachers need to have?
I'm going to say 100% that this is being filtered through teachers, and something that Mike had said earlier too. Teachers are brilliant at engaging in those social, emotional conversations, and they already have this. They already have the skill set to be able to draw out the learning moments and to facilitate conversations between students or around a particular idea. I think the one thing we can do a better job of is providing them with situations, with context, with great resources too that Mimi and Mike both pointed to. I know a lot of them use like the common sense curriculum is a typical one that they will operate under, but I think having conversations around expectations, right? All teachers do this at the beginning of their classes. What are the expectations? Let's agree on those together. Let's talk through those together about what's appropriate, what's inappropriate. And then when it comes out of the classroom, it's much easier to implement those and talk to those as opposed to saying, here are my rules, and this has been handed down from the district or from the state. Instead, having conversations about what that's going to look like in the classrooms, giving that power to the teachers, but providing them with the resources to be able to have those conversations, I think is important.
And I'll end by saying and offering just a little bit of a plug for our very own Friday Institute. Because what's unique about what we're able to do here at the Friday Institute is we get to work along the spectrum of pre-service teacher education through teacher professional learning opportunities. And so part of this conversation today has been one of educating ourselves around what the benefits are, around what the kind of concerns are, where we want to avoid or mitigate some of the harms. And so that's also raised our own educative capacity here. And I would expect, as we've been having our own internal conversations, this is very much a part of a conversation that we see as this is a starting point and a continuing from here point that we will continue and carry forward. So shameless plug, maybe stay tuned for what happens out of the Friday Institute next. But I want to thank our panelists. I want to thank everyone here for being really patient for our kind of blended format panel here. And just again, you've been very generous and very rich with your examples and the resources. So just a lot of appreciation from our audience. Back to you.